Welcome to Conversations with. On this show, my guests and I explore the bumps and triumphs of their journey to extract the gems from their experiences, because success leaves clues, and today we turn those clues into billboards for you. I'm your host, Gene Bernier, founder of Peeled Back, speaker and co-active coach, guiding leaders to pursue a life worth living. Hey everybody, welcome back to Conversations with. Today, this is episode 120, and we get to dive into the world of writing and fandom with Terry Bartley, a respected educator, author, and award-winning journalist. Beyond shaping young minds at Scott High School, Terry penned Tyranny of the Fae and delves into the synergy between writers and fans on his podcast, Most Writers Are Fans. With accolades from top institutions and insights from his multifaceted career, we're set for a fascinating conversation today. Definitely want you all to tune in. Terry, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, you make me sound really great when you say all of it out loud together. It sounds really, really nice.
Well, that's because you are really great, and these just aren't my words. I'm taking what you gave me already and just putting a different voice on it. It's always so different when you hear somebody else read your intro, because those are all awesome things that you are doing, my friend.
Yeah, and you have to be braggy in those bios, and it's different when you type it up or you put it in something. When you hear somebody else say it out loud, it's like, oh wow, that actually does sound sort of impressive.
Well, again, thank you for being on the show. Today, our show is all about talking about the challenges that we've gone through in our lives and how we've overcome them. And you, as a writer, a podcast, and a teacher, you've definitely led some adventures in it. But let's focus on your journey of writing your book, going on your book tour, and what all led up to that. So where does your writing adventures start in your life?
Yeah, so really it starts about 5 years ago. I was diagnosed with ADHD. I spent a lot of my time jumping from job to job, like not knowing, like not having any direction really. And every time I would get a new job, I would be like, this is my passion in life. I'm doing the thing I was meant to do, that I was put on this earth to do. And then a year later, I'd get another job where I said the exact same thing about it. And it's like, and eventually I realized, like, this isn't normal. Like, this isn't something that people just, you don't have like 12 purposes in this life. Like, usually there's like a thing that you focus on. So once I got diagnosed with ADHD, I was like, I got to figure out something to stick with, because honestly, even being a teacher is a thing that I stumbled into, because I was working at a nonprofit part-time. I started subbing as like a supplemental gig to make more money. And I had to, the Board of Education wanted me to like pursue a teaching degree just to be pursuing it to be able to sub. So by the end of the pandemic, because I did most of that through the pandemic. So like after quarantine, whenever we came back, I finished up my education degree, and then I was like, well, I might as well teach now, which is like unusual for a teacher, right? Usually this is like people's passion and they like do it forever. So like even this is a thing that I kind of stumbled into. So then writing is this thing that I was like, well, I went to school initially. Whenever I got my bachelor's, I went to school for English to be a writer. So maybe like do that. So then I started writing once a week, every week. I just had a schedule where I'd go to Starbucks every Wednesday. I'd write for an hour, and then I would just sort of come back and do it again. And just doing it every week for, a year or more, like my novel came together. And then I kept doing it, and then a bunch of short stories came together. And that's where I am now.
That's incredible. Let's dive back into like that. You set a consistent pattern up for yourself to be able, hey, every Wednesday for 1 hour, I'm going to go write at Starbucks. What led you to that like initial like small aha moment, be like, well, what if I just put an hour into the thing I love every week?
Yeah, it's interesting, because you see a lot of writing advice that like you have to write 1,000 words a day, or you have to write, whatever. And the key to that, because I think that we get stuck on like the numbers, but I think the key is actually the consistency, right? It's like doing it regularly, whatever that looks for you. Like if it's once a month, once a year, even, right? If you're consistent with it, it's just having a schedule. And I think that for me, I realized that if I tried to do it every day, I'd burn myself out. Like I wouldn't follow through. So I just knew that once a week I could stick with. And the thing that was sort of amazing is I also set deadlines for myself, because that's, first of all, like, it's an ADHD thing, but I also think it's like just a people thing. like we're motivated by deadlines. If you don't have deadlines, you don't want to finish. You just want to you want to take your time and go
Yeah.
slow. But as I got near my deadline, I realized that like I could make it. So then I got really excited to kind of like write outside of that 1 hour a week because like I just wanted to like reach the goal.
Oh,
So I think
interesting.
that's the other thing too, is like I think that setting like deadlines to finish goals are important for this kind of thing.
Right. But it sounds like, if I'm understanding right, like the initial starting of the writing didn't start with a deadline in mind other than this is my time to go write. And as you were doing the writing, that goal appeared, or did they show up simultaneously?
I think they were, if I can remember correctly, I think it was pretty simultaneously because I sort of like I started to plan out my life. Like I was like, I'm not happy with where my life is because I've been, like I said, I've been jumping job to job. I was making really no progress. I kept like making plans to move to like a big place like New York or LA someday, and then someday would like come and go. And it's like, well, I
Yeah.
guess I guess this
Oh,
isn't
the dreaded
a
someday.
plan I had. So I was like, I've got to start making real plans if I want to see my life go where I want it to. So I just sort of like set some like random long-term goals in my journal that was like, all right, so this day I'm going to have a book written by. This day I'm going to try to pay off all my credit card debt. This day I'm going to, do this and that. And just sort of like setting those goals gave me, like goalposts, right? Like things to shoot for.
Right.
So once I feel like once I set the long-term goal, then it was like, so then how do I accomplish this? Like, what do I have to do to get there? And I think that that's when I saw that like once a week was sustainable. And then I would just sort of figure it out from there. Like I would do
Right.
that and then I'd figure out what to do once I got closer to the deadline.
Right. It sounds like you like you said, you took charge and said, this is where I want my life to go. You set a deadline, whatever importance you had on that, you set it, because now you've got your goalposts. And now you started building that foundation of like, where can I build the consistency into my life to be like, I can build and trust off of this. And if I like it, I'm going to keep doing more of it.
Yeah. And it was just like, because now like I require deadlines now to function. Like because I didn't have a ton of dates set whenever I got back from the tour because, like the tour was a big thing. So like I knew that I had to kind of like, I'd figure out the rest of my life once I got back. Right. Because
Right.
like it was a lot. So once I got back, like now I'm starting to set deadlines for everything else because I started to not follow through because first of all, like it's only been 3 weeks. So like, let's not pretend like I've had all this time that I've been wasting, but like,
Yeah.
also I didn't like without the deadlines, I just wasn't motivated to continue. So then I had to be like, I got to know when I need to finish these things by so that I can then like force myself to do them.
Right. And without it being like this wispy sometime in the future goal, you were able to say, hey, on this date, I need to be done this. How do I work backwards and actually plan the rest of my life living up to that point?
Yeah. And then I think too, the fact that I put myself out there enough over the past year or so that now I feel like I can't just stop. Like now I've set expectations, you know what I mean, for myself. And now I have to like
Yeah.
follow through on them.
You're like, oh man, I told myself I would do this. Now I got to go live up and do it. All right, here comes the work.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself along the journey of setting that deadline, setting the ambition, and going, okay, you might not know all the right steps right now, but you're going to figure it out and you got to get started, is what I hear.
Yeah. And something that's interesting about ADHD is that we do this thing where whenever we accomplish something, we don't see it as an accomplishment because it's like not the thing we wanted. Like it's just like a step to the thing.
Yeah.
So setting these like deadlines, like I set a deadline to finish the novel and then I did. And then it, like that felt like an accomplishment because I did a thing that I had set out to do,
Right.
And it wasn't just because oftentimes like we're working a job and we'll like do well in that job, but we won't have specific goals in it. You know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah.
like, oh, you'll get promoted. You'll be like the top seller on your team or whatever your job is. And you don't recognize those successes because they weren't actually like goals. They were just like the job you worked, So I think that was the big thing I realized is like, I like whenever I set these deadlines for myself, I actually recognize the accomplishments, which is like revolutionary for a person with ADHD.
So what is that like for you, is when you recognize and acknowledge that accomplishment? Because that's a hard thing for anybody to sometimes do, is like step back and go, oh wow, that was an accomplishment. Yeah. what is your, I guess, ritual around celebrating that accomplishment for yourself?
Yeah, I'm still not good at that. um, I, I think that I think it's just good for me whenever I'm in therapy and the therapist says, you did this as an accomplishment. That I'm like, oh yeah, that is true. That's often what it feels like for me, is whenever people remind me that it's one. And I mean, like, I think that I acknowledge it, but I mean, at the same time, it still doesn't feel done, because I think that that's part of
Mm,
what because a career, right? If you're not just working a job, but you're building a career, it keeps going. That's the point of
yeah,
it, right? So I think that part of it is like, even though my book is out in the world now, like it's been out for a couple of weeks now, it's still not done, because like I did the book tour to promote the book, but like most independent authors start promoting like now, like after it's out. So
right.
like I'm really just starting, and I think that that's something that's hard to remember, because I've done all this like work ahead of time, you know.
So it's like it's all about building all these things up, reminding yourself that it's not actually done, but there's still some important goalposts that you can kind of remember to high five as you're going by, going, I'm building a career. I'm going to assume you want to do this for quite some time in your life. So one book does not complete that career.
Yeah, and it'd be great to make a living off of it, you know.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate goal.
Uh, well, Well, let's dive into a little bit off camera where you were talking about all the things that over that last year that you were building up, like your podcast. You've got the book is being published is also like a pathway to another novel that you're working on that you want to get published within the next year. So, tell us a little bit about the journey of going. Okay, I need to build a foundation. I need to support this career. And book one, The Tyranny of the Fae, will be my kind of my test bed for how do I do this and what am I going to learn through it?
Yeah, so basically I had written the novel like I said, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. It was pre-pandemic, so anywhere from 1 to 10 years ago, you know, because time
Yeah.
is a weird thing. But I finished the novel. I started editing it. And I think that that's whenever I started talking to you initially, like with the coaching sessions, was where I was trying to edit the novel.
Yeah.
And I just realized that I just didn't know what I was doing with editing. Like I was kind of like trying to figure it out as I went. And like you need an editor, right? Like I've realized that now. Like you need an editor if you want to actually edit a thing. You can't just do it yourself because you're too close to it. You can't see
Yeah.
the changes that need to be made. So then about a year after that, I was like, I need to set some kind of goal for myself to keep writing new stuff. So that's whenever I started writing these short stories. I set a goal last year to write 100 short stories, which I didn't meet the goal, but the point of it was the goal, right? The point of it was just to get myself to do it. It didn't matter if I
Yeah.
actually met it. So I started writing short stories. I finished out with like 52. It's like one a week ish. So like not bad.
Yeah.
But as I was writing those, around like the middle of that year, I was talking to one of my good friends, and he was like, "So what are you doing? Like, are you going to publish these, or these like what are these going to be?" And I was like, "Yo, you know, like I'm putting them up on this website. Like it's just a thing I'm doing just to kind of motivate myself." He's like, "Well, you really, if you like them and they're good, you really should publish them. Like you should probably do that." And I was like, "I mean, maybe." And eventually, he sort of talked me into like trying to start the author career early. And the more I thought about it, the more sense it made to kind of like try to figure all this stuff out before I publish the novel, because like I have a better sense of what I'm doing and I can do a better job at it, like all those things. But
Right.
then also the other thing I realized is that the more I do early, the more of a foundation I have, so people can like know who I am. They start seeing my name more. Then they start realizing like this is a fantasy author. So if I like fantasy, I might like things he does, you know? And then I kind of like sat down with him and we set together like this calendar of like things I wanted to do to sort of start building out this foundation. And that involved, you know, I had originally planned to do a podcast once I started writing these short stories, just as a way to attract readership to the short stories. Because, you know, if you have, I'm sure you know this, if you have guests in a podcast, the guests will then share out that you did the podcast,
Yeah.
which then will bring people to your platform, which then might get people to like check out other things that you do. Like that's why we do this originally, right? That's the point of these kinds of things, is to get guests to share out your stuff.
Yeah.
So that was the idea, like just another promotional tool for the stories. So I started doing that because I was just like, I got to start doing that because I'm getting readers on the short stories, but not at the extent that I'd like. Like I'd like more. So I have to do the podcast just to get people to know who I am. So I started doing that. And then I was like, and I really should do some sort of social media thing. I didn't really know what to do at the time, but TikTok made sense because Book Talk is like huge. But also, I like the idea of the short videos. That format works well for me because I can come up with like 1 to 2 minute snippet, like a thought I'm having or some sort of random observation. And it's an easy thing to just kind of like throw down onto TikTok and not put a lot of thought into. It doesn't feel like work. It's like a fun thing that I do on the side. And that's ultimately, this is like a tip, by the way. Like for promotion, you want to do things that you like doing. You don't want to do things that feel like work because then you're not going to do it. So
Preach that. Like take a moment, everybody, to listen to this. Is like there is a multitude of ways to put yourself out there and to get your to practice your voice and get yourself known and share value and connect with others. Why pick the ones that you don't like?
yeah,
And that are just going to be a grind, because all what Terry's talking about and running this podcast and all the other stuff that anybody else that's putting themselves out there, it's a lot of work. Like it's not a small amount of work. It's usually way more than you expect it's going to be.
yeah, it's. I mean, as a teacher, it's like, and people think of teaching as a job that's more than a full time job because you do a lot of work outside of the classroom, right? But it is a full time job also, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
and also the writing, just the act of writing, is also like a whole other full time job. So like I'm doing the jobs of at least 3 people, probably more if I'm being honest. But like I think that that's part of being an independent creative is like you have to kind of build out those resources by yourself until you can afford to have other people to do it.
Yeah.
And like I feel like I'm getting more of a support system now. So like I'm not doing as much by myself, but like it's rough in the beginning because you're doing so much and you're so mentally exhausted that it's like, it's hard for me to be creative when I'm writing because like I've done so much promotional work.
So that's a great like segue. Is like, how do you protect that part that is like what you're doing it all for? You're doing all this extra work so that you can get your writing out there, which means you want to be writing. So how do you keep that do you keep that part sacred for yourself and protect it and isolate it so that it doesn't have all that bleed through of the work that goes into doing the thing that you love?
I mean, I feel like I'm still figuring it out, if I'm being fully honest, because I started. So the book was available for pre-release in like March of this year. It didn't come out until August. So around March is whenever I really kicked up the promotion for the book. So I was doing a lot of
Right.
podcast interviews. I was doing a lot of, my own podcast. I was doing a lot of like appearances, and then like also booking the tour, like also doing, because, like all of those are like simple, easy things that I can do on this side, not just things that a full other person should be doing. But when I was doing that stuff, like it was challenging to write. Like I couldn't make the time because, if I was doing like 12 podcast interviews in a month, like I can't just also then spend time writing. Like it's just hard to use that time. And the plan was to write a lot over the tour because I thought that I'd have more time to myself, which I'll admit I did. I had a lot of time to like think and to like sit in my car and drive. But I couldn't, whenever I go to Starbucks to write, I'd end up like watching TV shows on my computer because like I just didn't feel I needed that time to decompress because I didn't have
Right.
it on the tour because I'm always in my car or like whatever. So I feel like I'm still kind of trying to figure out that balance because the truth is promotion isn't over. Like now I need to continue the promotion train, but how
Yeah.
can I do that while I'm still like, and I think that maybe it's just coming down to like not doing as much, like now maybe not doing as much of a push with like the podcast interviews. And I'm trying to like bank up podcast interviews right now for my next season, which will be coming out in like November.
Right.
So I'm trying to do a lot of that stuff now. So then in like a few weeks, I can start doing more writing and not being as focused on this side of it. And I
Right.
think that maybe that's the thing is like chunking out time in a way that's more sustainable and also like isn't as hard of a strain mentally.
Right. And I think what I hear here is, as you're going through all those things, what is important in that time is shifting, right? So it's not writing is important to you, but like, so is the promotion, and so is, teaching and all these other things, and being able to manage knowing that I get to change and decide where the importance lies. So then I can then set up the next chunk to be ready for me to go in and execute.
But yeah, and the reality, is like when your day job is not the thing you want to do, which is like for people like us, I think is often the case, right?
Yeah.
Is oftentimes your day job is a thing you have to do, and then everything else that you think of as your real job is like stuff you have to do in your off time. But whenever that's the case, like you sort of have to chunk out your job as like time that you can't put other stuff into. Like your job has to be this separate thing that you do. And like right now, like this year is going to be challenging for me as a teacher. Like I'm teaching 3 college level classes, which I've never taught college level before at all in my day to day, on top of like other honors classes and like building out a journalism class. Like it's a lot as a teacher,
Yeah.
independent of like, I feel like this would have been a hard year for a teacher who wasn't trying to become a full-time writer,
Right. Using their teaching gig to help them launch what their next adventure is going to be.
That's the thing about stumbling into a job is like you gotta then do the job.
Well, yeah, and I think there's another piece here that's important is like it may not be like the thing that like lights up all the passions for you. And a job doesn't necessarily have to be. It's also like this gateway to allow you to go do this while keeping food and lights on in your house and helping you promote your book is like it's actually the revenue and the source to do all the things. It doesn't have to be the thing that is your number one purpose or passion. It sounds like there's some good connections around the English and writing and helping others find that, but it is a gate. Without that stepping stone and that rung on this ladder, you wouldn't have these other pieces quite the way that you do.
Yeah, and truly I'm grateful to have this job as the job I'm working, because like I wouldn't have been able to take the summer off to go on tour if I worked any other job. Like any
Yeah.
other job, you can't say I'm going to take 2 months off and drive around the country. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Like I happen to have summers off as a teacher, so it really
Yeah.
allowed me, because I felt like as an independent creative, like you use whatever resources you have at your disposal. And a resource that I have as a teacher is I have summers off. So how can I best use that time to do the thing that I do?
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your road trip, what it was like to plan it and how it went. And off camera, we were talking about the difference between pegging like the sales versus other learnings towards the reasoning to keep you motivated and moving through that 2 months of going out there and going to independent bookstores and putting your name out there.
Yeah, I mean, so I remember whenever I was talking to like a nurse or something over a telephone service, and I was telling her about the tour, and she was like, "Well, you're not booking this yourself, though, right?" And I was like, "Oh no, I am." And that was the first time I realized, like, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe that's not normal. I'm doing all of this myself, um, because like it's a lot of time to have to email bookstores and then
Yeah.
follow up with them and then call them and all these things. So yeah, I mean, so I plotted out the tour. I set like the map where I wanted to go, with dates, and then I would reach out to basically every bookstore in each city I planned on stopping in to see who would host me with the live podcast tour. Because so this is sort of like a bit of inside baseball. The point of the podcast, I had 3 seasons before the tour. So season 1 was about like just establishing it, like interview whatever writers I know, get like 6 to 7 episodes, so it looks like it's a podcast. So then whenever I invite people later, if their agents look at it, they see episodes that are like, it's more than an episode. It looks like a real thing, right?
Yeah.
So then the second season was about getting like slightly more high profile names to make it look a bit more credible. Then the third season was just kind of like then establishing more of it, that it's more of a thing. So then
Right.
at that point, whenever I reach out to bookstores or coffee shops or whatever to host it, then they can look and say, "Oh, well, this podcast has been around for a while, and look at these names. Like I know some of these authors, So then they're more likely to then like take a chance on me like doing a live episode in their bookstore, which isn't typical. Like most bookstores didn't even understand what I was trying to do, but they understood like having authors come in and talk about their book and things. So and my idea was like, this is my first book, so like no one knows who I am. They shouldn't know who I am yet.
Yeah.
But if I can get a local author to come in that I can interview, then I can basically use their name to get people to come out and see the podcast, which then they'll hear about my book, and then they might pre-order my book or whatever.
Right.
Like it's a game of dominoes. So that was basically the idea there, and it was just like I said, it was a lot to get bookstores to understand what I was even doing. There's even one bookstore in Vegas who kept sending me emails saying like, "Are you ready for your signing? Do you have books?" And I want to be like, "This isn't a signing. I want to do a." And then eventually it was just like, "I guess I'm doing a signing because you don't know what I'm doing. I guess I should get some books that I can do a signing since you don't really understand what's happening." So I had my first signing in Vegas just because that bookstore didn't understand what the tour was. That was a whole other thing that I did.
Well, and maybe a happy coincidence. What was it for you to, if this journey was all about learning, building this foundation, be like, you had your first book signing, Terry?
It was
What was that
very
like?
cool. Yeah. I sold like 12 books, I think. And you hear about authors setting up book signings where no one comes in. So that seems like a
Yeah.
success for a fully unknown author to have sold 12 books. So like I feel good about that. And it was cool to like meet people and talk about what the book is and to get people excited about the book. So like yeah, like it was a fun thing that I had no intention of doing. And then I ended up doing it.
And one of those small achievements we were talking about earlier in the conversation is like, you get to celebrate that too. It's like you sold 12 books. You're a brand new unknown author. You went to some random bookstore in Vegas who didn't understand that you were trying to do a live cast podcast in there with an author, and you ended up selling 12 books and getting a taste of what that part of that life could be like down the road.
Yeah, and I mean, something I did realize is that so I get a bit of like inside stuff. Like I don't make a ton of royalties on books. Like I make like $1 per book if like an independent bookstore sells it. If I sell it, I make like way more money.
Yeah.
So, also, that was like a fun thing to learn. Like if I buy it myself and then sell it, like I make a ton more than if it's distributed out to the bookstores. So
Right.
also that was like a cool thing to learn at the signing.
And that adds to this place of like, if this is going to be your path to your career, it's like those are fundamental things to learn, because it's important about business to understand the dollars and cents and margin and how all that works and where it's going to work. It's like same thing with like singers, is like they make a buttload on the road on tour, which is like their version of a book signing at a much larger scale, obviously, but like that's where they make their money versus the plays off of Spotify or the radio.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of it too, is just kind of realizing, and that's sort of like a perspective shift that I had to do before I even started planning the tour, because like a lot of independent authors basically treat this as like ebooks is like all you do, all you want to do is sell ebooks because like they're cheaper. So as an unknown entity, like people are more likely to risk a couple dollars than they are to risk like like my book is like $23 if you buy it new. So like that's not nothing, right? Like that's a chunk of money. But the way that I'm thinking of having books on bookshelves in bookstores is like as a promotional tool. If people see it on the bookshelf, it lends some credibility to it.
Right.
And even if they may not buy it at that bookstore, they may buy it as an ebook later. They may buy it as an audiobook or whatever. Like it gives them like this book looks like it's a real thing that I should care about.
Yeah, this exists. Who is this guy? What else is he doing? Oh, he's got more coming.
Yeah, so part of it is I think just kind of because I mean if you talk to any like self-published author, they're all gonna say that like hardcover, like especially hardcovers, because I was doing hardcovers first because I'm pretending like I have a publisher, right? That's the whole point. That's what I'm doing here. So like I'm doing the hardcover thing first, and I'll do paperbacks, which comes out in like a few months. But the idea there is like I'm doing the thing that the big guys do, so that it looks more. I'm trying to mimic it, so it looks more like I am that. So. But like, if you ask any self-published author, like print isn't part of their plan. Like they just don't consider that like profitable, and it's not profitable. But that's not the point,
Right. So, what is the point?
Yeah, it's the marketing. You know what I mean? It's to make people think that I'm more credible than not that than I am. Like I feel like I'm credible, but I think that whenever you talk to somebody, if they like whenever a bookstore's seller says something like, "Are you self-published?" They're not saying that in a way that's like, because that's cool that you're self-published and you're driving around the country. They're saying it to say, "Oh, so do we need to care? But should we take you seriously or not?"
Right. Be like, we only have so much bookshelf space. Do we really want to put yours up there?
Yeah, I remember I talked to one guy who was like, well, we only really do this for local authors. And I want to be like, well, how many authors from West Virginia comes into your store and gives you promotional material to hand out?
Did he have an answer?
Yeah, he was like, well, yeah, you're right. Not you're the only one. So
Well, and it sounds like you're doing it a little bit different, and by utilizing your podcast, talking and building your network of other independent writers, it's like sounds like a bit of a source of like, what are they doing? What aren't they doing? And what's the gap between what they're doing and what the big guys are doing?
well, and I just kind of feel like I think that we could all agree, like all of us in society, that the entertainment industry is a little bit broken right now, which could be evidenced by like two major strikes happening in Hollywood right now.
Yeah.
Like at this point, it seems like it's hard to be somebody who's not at the very, very top. Like if
Right.
you're trying to break into the industry, whether you're a writer, whether you're an actor, whether you're a musician, because like you talk about Spotify sales, like if you like basically you have to, if you make 1 million sales, you can probably buy a meal at Wendy's. You know, like it's not like
Yeah.
like that used to be, you'd be like a #1 Billboard seller if you had like, you know, 1 million plays on the radio or whatever, you know. So like we're in a world where it's very hard it's very hard to, or it's very easy to like start. It's very hard to succeed. And
Well,
I think that we have to like figure out how to do that. And what I'm trying to do with this is I want to prove that you can be a successful author like the same way that musicians are, by like putting a lot of hard work into it, and like, you know, driving and then around the country, like visiting bookstores, putting in the footwork, but then also like just grinding and keeping at it. And I think that that really hasn't been tested before, you know. Like I'm trying to kind of like break new ground here.
Well, you're also kind of like created your own publishing house around you, and a system for that others, if they listen to this and probably your own podcast and other ones you've been on, can start to take some notes and be like, oh, that's interesting. What can I continue that he's doing? What can I start doing that maybe is a little bit different? Realize this is a marketing game. This is about getting the word out and about then utilizing your book as a marketing material, your podcast is a marketing material, your interviews are marketing material, the short stories you're putting on that website you referenced, all this adds up to, and your TikToks all add up to like this catalog of marketing material to use.
Yeah, because I think I mentioned this before. I didn't mention this during the show, but like I realized like I got into this band called Sub Radio in like May of last year. They got really viral for doing this cover of, it was a parody of Stacy's Mom called Stacy's Dad. It's like a queer cover of Stacy's
Okay.
Mom. And they got really big from that viral TikTok. And then like I eventually just started digging into them because I was like, I saw them the second time. The second video they posted of it, I was like, I'm curious now who this is. So then once I got into their TikTok, like they had a ton of videos and I could go back and watch a ton of stuff from them. Then I went to their discography and they had like a bunch of music they'd released previously. That was all really good that I got into. And it just sort of hit me like people have to have things that show people who you are, and like lots of things, so that if somebody is like interested, they need stuff to kind of like delve into and sort of like really, really obsess over what you do. So if I don't have that, they can't do that. So like, you know, there's like, I don't know, like over 200 videos on my TikTok right now. There's like 4 seasons of my podcast. These are things that people can like really get to know who I am. And like these other podcast interviews I've done like all over the internet now. Like those are things that, you know, I've been really vulnerable in a lot of these interviews. And I think that people, if they're going to connect with me, like it's out there, you know, like they're able to see who I am.
And part of that too, Terry, is like I hear this, like you're kind of by providing all that options and opportunities for them to get their first like taste and connection with you, and then go off and binge you later if they like what they're seeing, is like by doing that you're kind of meeting them where they're at versus being like staying like true to be like, I'm a writer, I only put out books, and if you like me you read my book, versus you going, well, I'm a writer, I'm also a podcast host, I'm also my own promotion agent, and I do all these things. I got TikTok and I got my students. Here we go. Here's everywhere that you can connect with me. Where do you want to come in?
Yeah,
It's
for
like
sure.
you're providing them the doors in versus going, there's only one way to get to Terry. Be like, actually, there's a whole lot of ways, and there's a lot of cool things in behind it once you open the doors.
Well, and the whole other thing is like you mentioned, like we talked about the musicians and how they don't really make money with like music plays. It's similar for authors, right? Like you make some money. Like there's a lot of authors now that do this thing called Kindle Unlimited, where you subscribe to Kindle. It's like a subscription service. You can read as many books as you want that are enrolled into it. You get paid like 0.001 cents or whatever per page read. So like you get paid very little. And like it's not a way. So like I price myself a bit more because I also think that there's a level of independent creatives tend to undervalue what we do. Like we tend to say like people shouldn't be asked to pay like the price they pay for anything else. And it's like, why not? why don't we deserve the same things as other people? Because it's not like I don't pay editors and, you know, cover designers and things that cost a lot of money. Like I absolutely do. So I should want to get that back in some way. But beyond that, I think that it's like, you know, I don't expect to actually make a lot of money or to be able to sustain myself through book sales. So what other avenues can I see for income? So like, I want to start like Twitch streaming sometime soon to have like another avenue. I want to start like the podcast if I eventually get ads on that. Like that's the way that I could get income. If I start a Patreon where I like post early chapters or something, that's like another way to get income. So I'm also trying to like look at ways that I can make a living as a writer that's not just book sales, because I just don't think that that's viable.
Right. And I think it's wise to acknowledge and see that and not go into it. That's the word I'm looking for. But it's wise to see that and go, hey, I realize that this isn't going to be the way. So I'm going to find other ways to allow myself to do the thing I love, which is writing stories and people being able to enjoy those stories. It also means I have to kind of get good at doing X, Y, and Z. And you said earlier about finding those things that you actually like, because as we've talked about on this show, there's a lot of different ways to go about that, and finding out what works for you, doing a little bit more of it.
And, you know, the thing that I thought a lot about is like a lot of authors, I've seen this on like social media with other authors, like a lot of them don't love to be super public or to be very open or to even show their face on like videos on TikTok or whatever. They'll do like things with just their books, like videos of books and like hands and things.
Yeah.
And I get that, right? Because a lot of authors are more introverted. A lot of authors like are more secluded and they don't love it. Like, but they're thinking of this like bygone time where you could release a book and then like be super successful with just that, like where the publisher would actually promote it for you, which by the way, even if I were traditionally published, that's not really a thing anymore. Your publisher doesn't really do a lot in terms of promotion. You're still doing a lot of it yourself.
Yeah.
So like, I think it is unfortunate that we live in a time where like authors sort of like have to do these things that are uncomfortable for a lot of them. And there's probably a lot of authors that aren't going to be successful ultimately because they're just either unwilling or unable, like they just don't have the skill set to do these things.
Right.
So like that is something that I think is unfortunate. But then also like on the flip side, like I think that I am fortunate because I do sort of have this skill set. Like I've always been kind of a performer. I did like, you know, theater in college and stuff. So like I don't mind putting myself out there. I don't mind kind of like being on camera and stuff.
And that too is like being on a camera just like we are right now. Like we're live right now. Anybody could be watching us. It's not edited. And that's okay. Like all this stuff takes repetition. It takes practice. Same thing with the writing and doing the promotion. It like this is all about putting in the reps to get to that point where it becomes a little bit more comfortable than it was when you started. And tie it back to like, and as well, you're not going to see the numbers that you think success also means. It's like you actually have to have a little bit of faith in yourself going, am I willing to put in the work over the next few years to figure this out, to start to understand what it takes to get to those numbers that I think success might mean in this industry?
Oh yeah, and it's hard. You know, like the first season of the podcast, I released, and I was like making a podcast to literally no one. Like, I was just releasing episodes, looking at numbers, and like maybe a person or two would listen to it ever. And that's hard. Like that's hard to do something and understand that no one's viewing it, but then also having an understanding that like I gotta keep, like, this is an investment, and like me doing this for no one like isn't ultimately for no one. It's for like a future audience that will one day come. But I mean, like, that's hard to like motivate yourself to keep doing it for like over a year.
Yeah. And then you get into like that 2-3 years. Like, oh man, I thought this was going to be an overnight success. And you're like, oh man, overnight successes take like 3 years minimum to like even open the door to. So it's like, it is that commitment to yourself of going, like when you said, I'm not doing this for anybody. No one's showing up. Be like, you kept showing up. You kept
Yeah.
getting better and kept refining that process and how you were going to do it, and opened up more doors for yourself.
Yeah, it's hard, and I think that you just kind of have to. I guess like a mental game, like you just got to keep doing it,
Yeah.
and it's discipline, and also like we said, it's doing something that's fun. Like
Yeah.
I like meeting these other authors and meeting people who do what I do. Like that's cool for me, and it's not work. Like we said,
Yeah.
like it's not work. I hate editing podcasts. That's a whole other animal. I don't even talk about that, but like the process of doing the interviews, like I love that part. Like
Yeah.
it's not hard. So like I think that that's kind of the flip side is like figure out what you like and then figure out how to do that.
Yeah. And I hear that as well. It's like there's a bit of like, to do the things you like is like you also have to do some of the things you don't. But like,
Yeah.
and what's that balance of them, right? Like, so
And then the
what
goal
I
is that I won't always be doing that stuff. Like I'd love to
no,
eventually be able to hire an editor to like edit the podcasts. And I don't think that's like super expensive. So it's not an unreasonable goal. It's
no,
just like figuring out like when can this happen,
right. It's I love that. It's not an if, it's going to be a when, and we're going to get there just like any other date and goal that you've set. Terry, remember how I said we were going to blow past the 40-minute mark? Well, we successfully did that, my friend. Our time management continues to be a streak that I haven't broken yet on this show. So, before we let you go, I want to give you an opportunity to give a shout out to the book and where people can find you. And when he's shooting it out, wherever you're listening or watching, there are links in the show notes too. So, Terry, don't be humble, sir. Give us a what can people find you?
Yeah, so first things first, the book is called Tyranny of the Fae. It came out 2 weeks ago. It is my debut book. It is out now, so you can buy that anywhere, like independent bookstores. You can buy it on Barnes and Nobles. As we're being very open here, is the place I get the most money. I get like $6 per book, and I get $1 per book at independent bookstores. I don't understand why that's a thing, but it's a thing.
Yeah,
So, if you want to buy it there, that's the best place for you to make money from it. But bookshop.org. I love supporting independent bookstores too. So like don't feel bad about it if you go to an independent bookstore. Like support them too; they deserve it. So that's the first thing. Tyranny of the Fae. Buy my book somewhere, anywhere. There's an audiobook also, so check that out too. And then I also have a website, terrybartley.com is my website. You can see all the stories that eventually became the book are there. Also, I'm going to be doing a number of public appearances. I'm going to be doing a book signing later in the year in DC, so that those dates are also there. Also, I have a TikTok. So my TikTok and my Instagram are both Terrlet, Terrlet. Long story as to why that's the way you can do it. And then my Twitter is also just Terry Bartley. So any of those ways are good ways to find me.
awesome, my friend. Awesome. Again, thank you so much for diving through all this. Before we let you go, I have one question left to ask you. We're going to jump into my time machine. We're going to go into the future by 10 years. When we open the door, future you's there. What does he say thank you to you for?
Yeah, I think it's all this stuff we talked about in this. I think it's thank you for making those podcasts for no one and making those TikToks for 200 views with 5 likes, Like thank you for keeping it up and like maintaining the hustle that feels like you're doing, that feels very thankless, like thank you for continuing that process.
I love that. Thank you for continuing the process. All right. And to everybody else that's watching and listening, thank you very much for following along with Conversations with. This is episode 200 or 200, 121. And make sure you hit that like or follow wherever you are, because it really helps the show get out to more people. And until next time, I'm Gene, and we will see you later. Oh, one last thing. It's the legal language. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professionals.